Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, there's this whole complicated situation throughout the episode of the whole Betty and Archie situation, and that's been kind of the bubbling questions, like, well, where's this going to go? Because they even got asked, was it last week? I think someone had asked me, like, how I felt about it, and I brought it up during the review. It made me feel complicated because, like, yeah, Betty and Archie would be cute together, and it's like at the beginning of the series I would have felt like that, but they've both been with Jughead and Veronica respectively for so long that it's like those are such built through relationships. They've been through so much together as couples that it would just suck because it's one of those things of like, that might be where your mind was at one point in time, but it's not where it is now. And even if it was, you don't want all that heartache to kind of echo out like it would, so that's what kind of makes you feel a little bad about it. I mean, it makes Betty feel bad about it. It makes Archie feel bad about it because obviously they love Veronica and Jughead, in respective of being their significant others, while also the significant other of each other is their best friend. So it's like, it's a complicated, nasty situation to be in, but they can't stop thinking about each other. Especially because, Archie and Betty have known each other since they were little. Like, the fact of the matter is, and even Betty admits, and even Archie, like, well in love with her when he was younger. She was madly in love with him, being like, oh, Archie, he proposed to me, but I was like, no, I'm gonna wait till we're 18. Because she's like, the fact of the matter is, wait till we get older. Because she was like, I knew I was gonna marry Archie and everything. Because the entire episode, Betty is looking through like some of her journals, and she's looking back at her younger her being so madly in love with Archie. Even at one point, she hated Cheryl because Cheryl kissed Archie, which is really interesting because remember that led to a complications because at the beginning of like all of this, like near the beginning of the series, Veronica kissed Archie, and that turned into a whole complicated issue too. So it's almost like history almost full circling itself in that regard of like Betty not liking anyone else, kissing Archie because of the way she feels about him and everything. And so now it's a thing of like, well, what do we do? Because they're in the bunker and everything. And she's like, because Archie's just like, oh, we're hanging out. She's like, yeah, but what? He's like, but he's like, we're just hanging out. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not doing anything, but this still feels nice, right? And she's like, yeah, and they're holding hands, and I was like, oh, like I said, it was so cute. I was like, more so than anything, like I said, it's more so like, I'd probably say 30-70, like 30% of me, they're like, oh, I would like to see where that goes, but there's a 70% of me like, no, don't do this, don't ruin your relationships, everything's good right now. But part of me feels like this storyline might still rear its ugly head later on. I don't, like it's a storyline that constantly pops up from time to time, because it's like something will happen where it'll just be like, oh, Betty and Archie, like it happened, like they've kissed before, even before like the whole fake kiss this season. What are they, like season 2 that they ended up kissing, I want to say. That might even been season 1. Because I talked about it when Cheryl caught them, it's like, oh, it's funny because Cheryl caught them the first time when they kissed, and that turned into a whole complicated thing. I want to say that was season 2, but I could be, remembering that wrong. Whatever the case may be. It's, so Betty's like, all right, Archie, let's meet up, a day from now, because I can't stop thinking about you. You can't stop thinking about me. Hell, Archie's even working on a new song that he wants to show her and everything. And so she's like, give us we're going to give ourselves a day to kind of really think through like what we want. And that's the big thing. Like, because even Archie went to visit Fred's grave to ask, he's like, if you were here, you'd probably tell me to follow my heart. But he's like, at the end of the day, he's like, I don't know what my heart wants. The fact of the matter is, I don't want to hurt anybody, but he didn't know kind of where he felt. But then like Cheryl reads her journal. She's like, oh, you really hated me for kissing Archie. Wait, is it because, so there was something there? He's like, no. She's like, that kiss that you saw, that was fake and everything. But then she's like, what, is there more to it? Which she's like, nothing's happened, but she's obviously not admitting the kiss that has subsequently happened, the kiss that happened last episode. But for her, it's just a thing of like, she's been in love with Archie for 10 years, but then Cheryl corrects her. She's like, you've been in love with the thought of Archie, like who you thought Archie was and everything. And obviously Archie isn't even that same boy she fell in love with all those years ago. He wasn't the same person at the beginning of the series. He's definitely not the same person after everything that's going down over the course of this series. So like, you were in love with the idea of Archie, of like, oh yeah, him being perfect and everything, but like obviously real world wise, especially in this town, there's no such thing as that. But she's like, and even she's like, I'm kind of just almost disgusted to say, but it's like, you and Jughead are actually perfect. Like, you two found each other despite all the terribleness that is this town. So you two were really in game. So it's like, before you go jeopardizing what you have to decide like whether you really want to take that step further, or do you want to make sure that you kind of cut it off at the head before things even get like a little behind, people's backs and stuff like that. So in a bunker, Archie's playing a song, and Betty thinks about a memory from like season 1 when she was struggling with her feelings for Archie, and she tells him to stop. He's like, but but she's like, I don't want her, I'm in love with Jughead, and you're in love with Veronica. He's like, yeah, but what about this? And she's like, it just has to end, because putting an end to it before it turns into something else. But at the same time, you're still kind of like, you get this inkling like there might be more to that. We'll ultimately have to wait and see. But obviously Betty's kind of pushing more forward about like, you know what, Jughead, told you to kind of work on the crimes by yourself, but no, it's almost kind of like, no, we are a good team, and I need to I think it's almost like a little bit of guilt about like, no, I'm just gonna like invest more even in our relationship, because I do believe in us and I do love you. So it's like, no, to kind of solidify it even more. And obviously, his mom, Archie's mom, hears the song. She's like, oh, you wrote that for someone very special. It's for Veronica. He's like, right, it's a surprise. I haven't let her hear it yet. But he also talks about the Naval Academy. He's taking a lot more serious. For him, it's like he's trying to start new beginnings. So for him, it's like, he's going to take this a lot more seriously. Even Betty burning some of her books, her mom suggested she keep one, but part of me was wondering, is it because it's like, but those are your childhood memories? She's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, Mom, that's all they are. They are memories. They're always going to be there with me, but I don't, truth be told, she doesn't need them as a constant reminder, like, because keeping them around is just going to chain you to the past of who you were. Because even Betty's changed. Betty's not the same girl she was all those years ago. Like, she's changed much like Archie, and who's to say these people they've become are compatible? I skipped over it, but like, I like Betty's explanation of like, basically, so much is changing in their lives, and there's safety in that, because safety in the fact is that this is a known component. They've known each other for so long, so it's like you have always felt safe with each other. So we feel like such a safe option. We needed that. What would be the word that known factor, because it's something that's known and it's easy and it's stable. Like, this will be something easy considering all the chaotic stuff that's been going, because they're potentially after they graduate, they're all potentially going to go their separate ways. So you want to hold on to a little bit of the past while also holding on to something that's safe. And at the same time, it's like, I mean, for one, life's all about taking risk. I know I find irony in me saying that, because I'm not one of those risk takers, especially when it comes to my dear sweetheart, because I don't take risks when it comes to love, when I should. But that came out super cheesy. I'm sorry. But the fact of the matter is, I thought that was just kind of an interesting perspective on it. Hence why she was like, I had an idea, like she was latching onto who Archie was, then how it made her feel back then. But once again, that was 10 years ago. You were very different people after everything that you've been through since then. And once again, over the course of this series, it's changed them drastically. So they're not the same people that she's putting in that spot. That's not the same her, and that's not the same Archie. So I don't know. Like I said, it's just an interesting development. So I'm curious, like, her mom let her keep that journal. I'm curious, maybe if you go back through the episode, you probably find out what specific journal it was that she ended up keeping. But I'm wondering, is it just because her mom was like, no, for my sake, keep one of the journals? Because, like, because her mom read her journals. Like, that was a thing, like, at the beginning of the series. I think there were subsequent points where she did it too, didn't she? I don't remember, but, there could be a deeper underlining meaning to all of that. But, I mean, to be fair, these are old journals, so it won't count as much. It's not like it's reading up-to-date stuff, but you get what I'm saying. So I'm curious to see kind of where things kind of go on that front. Another side of this episode is Cheryl and Veronica's business. Basically, Hiram is making moves in his business, and he's talking about like, you didn't think of this, Veronica, but Veronica's like, we're aiming for the college students and stuff like that. And what's those dudes that named the Malloys show up? And I love that Cheryl is like, here comes the cast of Swamp Thing. I was like, that's such an interesting reference and, to make. But I guess it's like, because, I mean, I'm assuming she's kind of referencing 2019 Swamp Thing on DC Universe, because it's interesting because that would be tangentially connected, considering that's technically part of the Arrowverse. because of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and obviously, so I would assume, like I said, I'm reading probably too much into it, but I guess it's just because like they do dress pretty much. I mean, I guess it also makes sense because it's supposed to be like because they're hillbillies and stuff like that, and obviously like Swamp Thing takes place in the South, so maybe that, maybe I'm thinking about it too much. But she said the cast of it, so it's like, well, the most recent one was a 2019, who they kind of dressed like that a little bit, some of the cast in it, so I guess I get it, so like I said, whether it was a situation I was reading too much into, whatever the case may be, I thought that was interesting because obviously the moment the Malloys show up, are like, oh, you're cutting into our business, but then it like Cheryl didn't think too much of it because for her, she immediately thought like, oh, this is my dad playing his ploys and stuff like that. But I was immediately like, oh yeah, this is gonna have nothing to do with Hiram. But then Cheryl looks and she's her mom, and her mom had come out. I was like, her mom must recognize him. They must not be with, but she never said anything. But obviously later on they show up, they trash the place because Hiram was like, no, they have no connection to me. Actually, they're very dangerous. Like, you don't want to get mixed up with them. And he's offering Veronica help, but for her, it's like, I don't need your help. This is my problem. I'm going to fix it myself. Also, I don't know if you're strong enough. And you can tell that kind of hit Hiram because he has pride in what he does. There was even this interesting line, I think is kind of, where Cheryl was like, oh, they could have molested my dear mommy or something. And I was like, that's so weird. Like, no, the fact of the matter is, you have such an effed up relationship with your mom. You're kind of forcing your mom to be here, considering the fact is all the nastiness that she did, just the very messed up, effed up, complicated relationship that you have with her. But also the fact is that, like, you set her up with this job because of all she was doing, trying to mess with you, Tony, and Nana Rose. More so you, but I don't know. The fact is that from time you're still showing concern from your mom. It's like, to be fair, I guess it's like, it's that complicated thing of like, despite how evil she is, that's still your mom. Because obviously Cheryl gets a little bit of her like that. I'd go as far as saying like her snappiness, her vindictiveness. Sometimes I think she kind of gets that from her mom. So like there is a kindred spirit there that Penelope is like an older version of her. So, but I think it's just like, she still loves her mom despite everything. It's just like you only get, one parent in your entire, two parents in your entire life, obviously, So, especially in her case, like she lost her dad, so it's like her mom's kind of all she has. I mean, even that's kind of a complicated thing because your dad kills your brother, so that's a whole gnarly situation all on its own. But it's just interesting that she felt that way. But because of all of this, Cheryl decides to kind of back away from the business because it's like, yeah, some people have rum in their blood, some people have maple, and just kind of doesn't go together, which I thought was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, you're making this metaphor after you found out about the whole Betty situation. And I was like, is that supposed to be you making a reference to that? But it's like, oh, I thought she was going to say something, but it's like, oh no, you're purely handling bits. Because to be fair, she doesn't know, she's just thinking these are just feelings right now. She doesn't know that Archie and Betty have kissed again subsequently since the fake kiss that she called, so that's a whole gnarly thing in itself. But Hiram went to confront one of the Malloys, beat the dude down, and you can tell he was kind of running low on his breath. But he let the guy live. The guy was like, I won't go after your kid again. As he was leaving, he drops his keys, and the dude beats the living shit out of Hiram. And that's the crazy thing. Like, once again, Hiram's always been so tough. Like, even when we seen him, like him and Archie fight in the ring in season 2, like it still seemed like he was still standing up. He was still kind of okay. Even, he might have gotten beaten and bruised, but it was like, this was just on another level because he's not at full strength. And obviously, like, for him, he considers it weak that he did what he did, letting him live. But then later on, like, Veronica actually asked him for help. It's like, oh, I need money so that I can buy out Cheryl's share of the business. And he's like, why? You never accepted my help before. It's like, because of what you said. You let that Malloy live because despite how nasty they are, because he's like, I hesitated. And it's like, she's like, that's a good thing. That shows you got your humanity back, that you're not all gung-ho about killing people. So it shows me that you're not the terrible person that you were, that you really, because he's always made these proclamations this season about like, oh, I've changed. I'm not the same person I was anymore. We've seen elements of it, but he seems like he hasn't been as bad as he has definitely been in the past. So it's like, oh, you're doing better. And then we cut to him being like, oh, while she's saying all this stuff of like, oh, I'm gonna give you another chance, Dad, because you really are a changed man. We see that he killed Papa Malloy, and it's like, okay, showing that he's still the evil person that he is, and he's like, yep, I really have changed. And the fact is, once again, he can sit there with a straight face and lie to Veronica's face. Once again, the whole complicated relationship, just like Cheryl, time and time again, has a complicated, messy relationship with her mom. Veronica's in the same spot. Because she even got that advice earlier in the season to kind of break that cycle with her dad, but she still keeps falling into it over and over again. So maybe this will be the season she finally does. I don't know. Because the Malloys are going to come after them hard because they're probably going to find out it was Hiram because Home Dude got beat up by Hiram. He beat Hiram up too, but he's going to be like, oh, this was retribution. So it's going to be the Malloys versus the Lodges. I'm about to call them Hodges. The Lodges. So he's basically sparked a war that he's not necessarily strong enough to kind of deal with. I mean, he doesn't really have he has his money and influence, sure, but physically he's not at peak strength. I mean, he doesn't really even have a crew that he kicks it with. Like, he doesn't have he can always hire people, sure, and maybe that's an angle he'll go down, but like, he doesn't have like a specific squad of people of like, oh, this is my defense squad, like, at least that we can currently see and stuff like that. So I'm curious to see what ends up happening in that regard, because that's probably going to turn into a nasty situation as things probably going to heighten and get worse. So we'll have to see. Another side of this episode, we have Reggie going to Kevin and Fang about the whole tickle thing, because at first he's like, oh, it's weird, but he's talking about the fact is he's broke, and Fang had told him that you make more money doing this than selling drugs. So it's like, all right, I'll do it. But the moment they got paid by Terry and it looked like I was like, oh, does Reggie have second thoughts about this? Oh, Reggie was thinking about, how about we cut Terry out of this and we make the content ourselves, put it behind a paywall. I'm like, yo, you doing your thing, kind of okay, going your own entrepreneur route. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And the moment they were doing it, I was like, oh, this ain't gonna go well. Terry's gonna come back striking at you, especially later on, because he was like, Kevin, you need to break things off with Terry, and Kevin doesn't. He's just kind of like, oh yeah, like, we have our reasons for walking. I'm afraid my dad's gonna find it, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, you should have at least told him the truth. I mean, it wouldn't have made anything better, because he would have given you a warning, like, no, don't do that. We got a good thing going, keep it going. But since you decided, like, no, I'm not going to do that, you kind of went a sly way about it. He, like, at least that option would have brought it up front, where he would have been like, oh, that's not a good idea. But, and I love that, like, it's like, well, Reggie supplies them with the boys because he gets the bulldogs, but obviously they don't want to do it, tickling each other. But it's like, oh, we'll do it if it's just girls, and then the vixens get involved. But like, Tony's like, no, because Cheryl's dealing with her whole thing right now with the rum and everything, so she wouldn't be too happy if I did that. And so, but Tony's like, all right, we'll do it, but the vixens tickle the bulldogs, and that's going to be how it works. And it's like, oh, okay. And interesting system of, great team, operation. And everyone's kind of excited, but you can even tell Kevin has reservations about it. And then later on, he gets a visit by Terry and his boys. And they're basically doing the mob thing of like, oh, we'll break your fingers so you can't tickle anyone anymore. So there's that. And Reggie, being who he is, being like, no, we're not going to take this line down. Okay, you want to threaten us? The next time you threaten us, or threaten my boy Kevin, try to threaten a hair on his head, the Bulldogs are going to handle you. We're going to do more than break your fingers. And then we get the Honey situation, which I think is fascinating, where she was basically like, yeah, we found out about it. Because even I was about to say, well, I mean, it's weird that they're doing what they're doing, sure, but they're not doing porn. I mean, it's a fetish thing, sure, but it's like them doing ASMR. It's like, the fact of the matter, it's nothing illegal. It's nothing. You can, I guess you can make it sexual, but it's not really sexual. So I was like, what is the rules? You're not breaking any laws. But then he spun it around where it's like, oh, you're wearing Bulldog and Vixen uniforms, so you're kind of a representation of the school. So that kind of breaks violations on its own, because it's like, what you do because you're wearing that uniform. It's like if you do some effed up stuff wearing the uniform of the store you work at, it's a bad reflection upon them, and you can get fired for this. So it's the same thing in this application. I'm like, honestly, Honey kind of sucks, but at the end of the day, I can see that being an issue, because your school going to be like, oh, these are people from so-and-so school, so I can see that being an issue, so I wouldn't blame him too much about that. But the way he's talking about it, he's like, your depravity, take that shit down, so they have to take it down. And he's like, right now, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But even later on, Fang, because Fang and Kevin were interesting enough, because Fang's going to a college where he can be closer to Kevin. And it's like, yeah, we should give it, I'm wondering what our relationship would be like if we're dating outside of town. And that's the thing. This, once again, as it's been stated multiple times, Riverdale is officially the murder capital of the U.S. So it's kind of like, yeah, well, not even just the U.S., probably murder capital of the world type of situation. But it's like, everyone is potentially moving away from this and everything. Like, obviously, like, Alice was talking to Betty about, like, her growing up and moving away, going to college and stuff like that. But now this about Fang and Kevin's relationship, it's like, yeah, without having, a state of, terror and murder constantly surrounding you, what is your relationship going to be like? I'm sure that's going to be an interesting conversation for Betty, Veronica, Jughead, and Archie, like all that, considering like so much of, especially some of their connections are kind of tied to said, death, destruction, and murder, especially because Betty's like mom and everything. I mean, everyone's got a little death, destruction, and murder, related to their like ecosystem, I mean, you can't help it, in Riverdale, and it's affected their personal lives in many different regards. So, but nevertheless, it's like, how did, it must have been Terry that told Honey about that, right? But then we see at the end, like I'm going to circle back to it, but that blue, it was the Scarlet Room had gotten shut down, and Honey was there. I was like, oh, it's like, is that how you found out about it? Because like someone burned the DVD and it was there, or maybe it's just because he looked stuff up like that. But then he's like, well, it's probably for the best this got shut down. But I'm like, that's probably bad. So part of me is like, does that mean you're behind the tapes? Probably not, but it shows that you are perverse enough, because we find out later on there's like sex tape and snuff films that we don't know what Honey's cup of tea is, so that's something to keep in mind. But it's like and I guess that's, and I think that's probably supposed to be the sign, like Honey is such a hard ass that he's so uptight about like, oh, what's right and what's decent, is because he's a very indecent person. Once again, unless your kink is something really bad and illegal, no shaming anyone's kinks. It's like, it's like, oh, a sex tape type of thing, as long as, they were consenting adults and, it wasn't kind of blackmailish type of situation. Sure, like as long as it's consent and, legal behind it, fine. But the moment we get in illegal territories, which I'm like, I think that's what that room was anyways, the really illegal stuff. So I'm like, Honey's got to be into that. And I think if he doesn't have that to satisfy his most likely twisted and illegal and super perverted proclivities, he will probably find other means of kind of satisfying that in the real world. So it's like, without that as kind of taming himself, he's going to turn into a nasty monster. That's kind of where I'm thinking they're setting that up. Maybe not, Like I said, we don't know what his thing is, but the fact is, what we know is in that room makes you go like, probably can't be good. We'll see. So there's that story. Then the other side of this whole situation is obviously Jughead looking, working with Charles, looking into this whole investigation of the tapes and stuff like that. There were multiple tapes that were sent back, but that was the only one of that nature, So it's like, okay, so they look at who dropped him off at the police station. Jughead thought he saw something, so he's like, oh, let me go check this out for himself. And he confronts Ethel, which I'm like, in the grand scheme of things, when you think about it, Ethel ends up kind of being mainly connected to every case. Not in the most direct way. Obviously, the Gargoyle King thing is probably the most direct connection she's had to any of the cases and stuff like that. But obviously, she was like, there was a whole thing with Jason back in season 1, and now the Gargoyle Kings and everything, and now her potentially rehabilitation. Because Charles had, eventually brings up the fact is that Ethel was kind of obsessed with Jughead. And, it's kind of like, oh, like, maybe you made something like this. But Ethel's like, no, I'm just trying to keep my head down so I can get the hell out of this town. Once again, everyone's seniors, they are trying to get the hell out of this town as fast as they can. So for her, it's like, there's been enough stuff associated with my name, especially that Gargoyle King stuff. So I'm like, I'm trying to get by, ignore everything. To be fair, there was a whole situation, because let's not forget there was also that situation of, wasn't it her mom and dad didn't they get divorced at one point in time? Or no, it's because her dad, I think that was season 2, her dad ended up losing his job. And that's kind of what led, I think, Ethel spiraling down to the whole Gargoyle King thing in the first place, I think. That was just like one of the leading factors, and that led to a complicated relationship between her and Veronica for a little while. But nevertheless, So, but, Jughead believes her when she says she wants nothing to do with it. Charles doesn't believe him, and so he investigates, actually brings her in, because it turns out when they searched her place, he found a sex tape. It's the sex tape Brett had made, and it's like, he's like, what did you do, buy this off of Brett? She's like, no. And he's like, come on, Ethel, I literally went up the bat for you saying you had nothing to do with this, and now you have this. But for her, it's like, she read the title, she thought it'd be interesting, she didn't realize it was Betty and Jughead's sex tape until she found out, and then she immediately turned it off. But part of me is like, because at first I was like, yo, are you really that into Jughead? But maybe that whole thing about her being into Jughead was just part of the Gargoyle King type of thing. Maybe that was just connected to that, so she doesn't necessarily feel that way about Jughead. Maybe that's a lie. Maybe there's more to this. But basically, she explained the Scarlet Room in the back of that place. Because like another clue to this whole thing was the fact is that she rented Friday the 13th like 16 different times. But now we find out why. Because she was going to the store instead of just the Velvet Room, which immediately every time I'm saying Velvet, I'm immediately thinking of Persona, just because there's a Velvet Room in the Persona games. So my mind immediately goes there. But it's like, because at first it's like, maybe like she was, because like she has her connection to like her being in love with horror movies and stuff like that. So it seemed like maybe that was it. But it was like renting that movie over and over again was just her excuse so that she could actually get something else from back there. Who knows what else Ethel was watching. Once again, kinks and all that. But obviously the FBI shuts that down because it also turns out there are stuff films back there, because it's literally the tape. It's literally a recording of Clifford killing Jason, which is like, that has to be in police evidence. So like being able to get a copy of that can't be simple, because like the only time we've seen that played, was like when, Veronica, Jughead, Archie, and Betty played it. I think Kevin was there too, wasn't he? In season 1. I think that's the only time. So I was like, you would assume that's in police evidence. So someone must have been able to get access to that, which once again makes me believe the people behind this has to be Charles and Chick. We still have not circled back to, because that was like earlier in the season they set that whole thing up of like, oh yeah, like I'm gaining Betty's trust and stuff like that. I'm assuming this is his way of gaining Jughead's trust, like, oh, let's work on this investigation. But it's also like, bad guys tend to do that. Like there could be a situation where like they work closely with the cops on a case, that way they get to monitor your investigation and also kind of steer you in the wrong directions. Maybe not, I don't know. This is all part of that game maybe. But the shop was shut down, but it's like, that's interesting. And then, tie in all the stuff I said about Honey, but then it got shown to Cheryl because whoever this is recreated it. And so it's not just Jughead, they now done it to Cheryl, recreating like, oh, your dad killing your brother. So now immediately my brain was like, oh man, you're going to throw up everybody's trauma. Because immediately my brain goes like, it's going to be super depressing if they do this, but it could be a route they go down. Recreating when Fred got shot at the end of season 1 by the Hood. Because there was even something, I forgot, there was one tape I did read the title. It was like the Hood Unmasked. There was a tape that said that Jughead, it's the one that he ended up touching when he went in the room. But that could be used against Archie, and because I don't know if they necessarily used the car accident that, I don't know if they'd used that, but that's such a traumatic moment specifically for Archie at that time. So that's why I'm thinking they might use that. They might use another. I don't know. I'm about to think like, what could they use for Veronica? I mean, maybe, using her mom shooting Hiram probably could use that, but it's like, a lot of terrible shit has happened to a lot of people in this town. So I think whoever this Boyer is going to be using some heavy ass trauma from everyone's lives against him. I mean, granted, there's a lot he could have picked from when it came to, but it's such a very complicated thing for Betty and Jughead. And even then, once again, they did what they believed what happened, even though that's not necessarily what happened. Because what's interesting though, it's not because like Jughead and Betty, they make it seem like Betty killed Jughead. Obviously, that didn't happen. But he did technically die for a little bit, so But because I'm about to say Fred didn't die from the gunshot, he survived and everything. But still, I'm going on a tangent and all that. I'm just curious to see if that's going to be the one in particular that ends up getting sent to Archie. What's it going to look like for the rest of the town? I don't know. Also, is this Terry situation done? No. Terry's going to come back with a vengeance. Well, he probably won't because this website got shut down. But to be fair, it could be Reggie kind of goes like, nah, we're going to do this super low key and everything. Because they were having success with it. But it's like, I don't know, now that Honey's kind of found out about it, I don't know. But they might circle back to it and be like, wait, Honey found out, like, maybe he's been looking at it. What other skeletons are in his closet? And because of that, they stumble across. I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I'm really interested, though, to ultimately see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.